Right, to give us more time with the doctor, let's cut the music short. 22 and a half minutes past the hour for Wednesday, December 12th. It is your Richie Allen Show live on Fab Radio 2, TuneIn Radio, triggerwarning.tv, and of course richieallen.co.uk. Europe's most listened to independent radio show. Thanks for joining us. Massive interest in our guest this hour. And I came across a number of tweets. Vaccine injury and the safety of vaccines is a subject that we speak about quite a bit on this programme, as you know, if you're a regular listener. And I've heard from many groups around Europe, like Regret in the Republic of Ireland, of course, where I come from, and other groups of people who believe that vaccines have injured them or someone they know. And it's hugely important that we talk about this because there is little or no discussion of this on commercial television or radio. So I was delighted to come across my next guest, my first guest. People were tweeting about him, and those tweets led me to his YouTube channel, which is terrific. It's a terrific watch. I will put out links to where you can find him on Twitter. He graduated from Johns Hopkins University back in 1971, giving away his age probably there. He's a board certified and has been recertified by the American Boards of Family Practice and Emergency Medicine. He is an MD, a GP, and this is very interesting. He is widely known as a pioneer of medical freedom because he was very much involved in the US, in the first ever law in the US which protected alternative medicine. That happened back in 1990 in Alaska, and he's widely known for that. Let's welcome to the programme Dr. Robert Rowen. Robert, thanks so much for speaking to us today before you start work as well. Welcome to our programme. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing good. I just got out of bed.
You've just got out of bed. Isn't it funny? I was reading something about you. On one of your websites, you declared yourself not to be a morning person, and
yeah,
I know.
So this worked out fine. It was good. Vaccines are a hot topic, especially where I am in California. I got deeply involved in this a few years ago when my state passed a draconian law literally forcing children to get vaccinated no matter what, to enter school. And this caused an uprising amongst a lot of people and a lot of controversy. And in the mainstream press, you see the standard dogma. It's sort of like in 1491, the world was flat, and if you said it was round or the earth went around the sun, you could get burned at the stake. Do you understand my metaphor here?
I do indeed. I do. I know where you're going with this, sir. Go ahead.
So everyone is reading the current dogma, and it's dogma that vaccines are safe, just like everyone thought that you should get a mammogram every year. And now we're finding out that that doesn't work, that it could be dangerous, you could be much worse off, and that's just come out every year, and it just came out again this week. Women in their 40s and 50s are getting better studies than children are, because when it comes to mammography, and by the way, I'm not on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. They're studying women for the long-term consequences of yearly mammograms, and they're finding out that it's probably worse than doing nothing at all. But at least they're studying them long-term. Children's vaccine studies are not long-term studies, they're very short-term studies, maybe 6 weeks, maybe a little bit longer. They only study one vaccine at a time. They're not studying them in combination. They're not studying the growing numbers that they're forcing children to get. I mean, yeah, you got my age.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I had a handful of vaccines, that's all. And now the children in the United States are getting over 70 in the first 5 years. And these vaccines contain aluminum, which is a serious neurotoxin, an immune system deranger. And we are seeing epidemics in this country of autism, of allergies, of rheumatoid arthritis, of chronic fatigue, of ADD, and this is out of hand. And there is no study looking at the global consequences of a fully vaccinated group of children versus unvaccinated. And I believe that's mandatory, absolutely mandatory before you go in this direction.
Robert, is it 70 now? Is that right? It's 70 in childhood, 70 shots. Or not 70 shots, but maybe 20 shots with a combined 70 vaccinations. Is that right?
That's about right. And it's more than 20 shots, I think. I think
30 shots, yeah.
Vaccines.
And when you were a young man, or even when you began practicing yourself back in the early 1970s, a child would have had only a handful of shots, maybe against polio, maybe against tuberculosis. Is that right?
We didn't even vaccinate against tuberculosis here. We got DPT, diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. Now they're giving hepatitis, and hepatitis has aluminum in it. Flu vaccine has aluminum in it. DPT has aluminum in it. So these kids are getting so much more aluminum injected into them than the FDA says is safe even to take orally. Now, don't take that literally. I'm not sure exactly that, but it is an unbelievable amount of aluminum that's being injected in them. And aluminum is not that dangerous taken orally because it's a common element in the Earth's crust. So we are going to get it in our diet, but we have safeties against that. But when you inject it, it's handled totally differently. And I hear people saying to me, oh, you get much more aluminum in your diet than you do by injecting it. That's absolutely true. Well, it doesn't take much water to inhale into your lungs to die.
Right, I'm with you.
It does by drinking. It's a matter of the delivery.
Robert, can I ask you a question? Dr. Robert Rowen MD is live on the line from California. Now, his website is DocRowen, that's ROWEN.com. I urge you, and I said this on my website today, if you're a parent or a parent-to-be, please have a listen to what the doctor is saying. You see, Robert, on programs like this, we often have health practitioners who are not doctors. And sometimes programs like this get criticised for not providing qualified doctors to talk about this stuff. It's wonderful to have you today because you are a doctor. And I'm urging people to listen to this. Go to DocRowen.com. Doctor, are you telling me that we metabolize aluminium or aluminum in a different way if we get it injected into us? So if we swallow it through our food stuff, we actually metabolize it differently than if we get it injected. Is there something about the blood-brain barrier here?
Well, the aluminum injected is in really, really tiny particles, and it's actually to upregulate the immune system to the antigen you're injecting. But the aluminum can be taken up by your immune cells, white blood cells. They actually take it up. They don't want it there where it's injected, so they take it up. And immune cells get free passage through the blood-brain barrier into your brain. So it's like a Trojan horse. The immune cells innocently pick it up doing their job, and via a Trojan horse mechanism, it carries it into your brain because of the free passage, and it can deposit the aluminum there. And aluminum in the brain is a nightmare. It's horrible because of the inflammation it provokes. This has been studied.
You're a rare breed, aren't you? I mean, you know this. And, I got 500 different questions. That's not an exaggeration from listeners today to put to you. And, of course, we don't have time to ask 500. But many of them were saying, this is, putting your head above the parapet for the doctor. Does he worry about talking about these things? Because you'll be aware of doctors in the UK, Robert, who were struck off, who lost their license to practice because they suggested that ingredients in vaccines could be contributing to the epidemic of autism, of autoimmune diseases. Is it a concern for you that you might be getting yourself into trouble by talking about this stuff?
Well, first of all, it's on the package insert that these ingredients are dangerous. So you're speaking truth. And if you lose your license for speaking truth, something is wrong. Now, the concern for me would be issuing vaccine waivers. The children in our state are compelled to get vaccines unless they get a medical exemption. And I feel bad for the families, but I am turning away families and I am turning away children because there's a witch hunt here. And you know what the term witch hunt means.
Yes.
I don't want to be a victim of a witch hunt. and I can serve more people than the few children I might be able to exempt before they come knocking at my door and hauling me away to burn my license. So I am not giving exemptions, and I'm making that publicly known right now. And that's because of the witch hunt. On the other hand, there is free speech here, and all I am doing is calling out the lack of proper study on vaccines. And no one can show me. I mean, if you want to do a proper study, here's what you do. And I challenge any of these pundits, experts, to tell me that I'm wrong. Take 5,000 children or 10,000 children, then there's plenty of them who don't want to be vaccinated, so you can get your control group. You take 10,000 children who will not be vaccinated against anything, and then you take 10,000 children whose parents believe in vaccines, and you vaccinate them for everything, and then you study them for 10 years to look at the all-cause morbidity and mortality in both groups. Now, what that means is you might well see a reduction in measles and mumps and chickenpox and everything else that I lived through, and I'm still here. You might well see a reduction in that, but what about everything else? What about the incidence of asthma, of eczema, of inflammatory bowel disease, of ADD, autism, which is in the package insert for these things? No one has done a combined study looking at all of these vaccines. One might be tolerable. But when you combine them all with all the different crap, and you look at all the different people, you know, you have different detox mechanisms than I do. Your child might have different detoxification than the next child does. No one is looking at who might be susceptible to this. And it's clear that there are vaccine injuries because in the United States, there's a vaccine court, and it's handed out over $3 billion in damages. Now, tell me now that vaccines aren't dangerous when a corrupt court, and yes, I call it corrupt, because you have to have evidence beyond 100% to get a claim on this. But when you have a court like this that's set up for you to fail, and it's handed out $3 billion, you know that there's something potentially wrong with vaccines.
Something smells. Something smells, yeah. Let me remind her, I've got to do this because it's a rare thing. Dr. Robert Rowen MD, successful practitioner, working in California with a very well-known and a very popular clinic, is live on the line with us from California, and he's put his head above the parapet. His YouTube videos are fantastic. Get on there and watch them, particularly if you have children. Inform yourself. You don't have to go along with it, but at least hear the other side of it. And he's asking questions about the efficacy of vaccines, the safety of the ingredients in them. I'll try and play the devil's advocate, Robert, just for a minute. I mean, I have to. It's the right thing to do. The vaccine industry or the pharmaceutical industry, they say there's no evidence that aluminium in vaccines or that mercury in vaccines is doing any harm. That's what they say, number one. And number two, they say that this idea of a correlation between the rollout of multiple vaccinations and the autoimmune diseases you talked about, they say there is no correlation. And they say that science has become better over the decades, and we have become better at understanding autism and ADHD, and we are better able to diagnose it. They say there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that vaccines contribute or that vaccines do, maybe show up, or that vaccines maybe give autism to children or the other autoimmune diseases that we just described. That's what they say. And of course, they're not here today because they never come on programs like this. But in the interest of fairness, they say no evidence, they say. Back to you.
Well, look, that's a good question. I gave you the answer when I gave the example about mammograms. Mammograms came out in the 1970s, and they pushed it real hard because they had to sell these machines to make a profit. Now, pharma got a way to make a profit when the United States Congress exempted them from lawsuits so many years ago. So now they can push a product and they have no liability for it. That's why it's coming out. Now let's go back to mammography. And this is in the news just this week.
Yeah.
Mammography now, they're saying that women should have the discretion for their own case of whether they should have mammography or not, because we're finding that it leads to unnecessary mastectomies. Women are getting their breasts chopped off for no reason, for diagnosis of cancers that go nowhere, and for scaring the bejesus out of them. So mammography has come into question 30 years after the damn thing came out. And I was against mammography 25 years ago. Look at my track record. I said something smells here. Now, vaccines are not well studied. The studies are not properly done. I told you they're done short term. They're not done in combination. They're not looking at these children over 5 or 10 years, looking at what happens to their immune system. Show me the study and I'll shut up.
Want to clarify two things. Dr. Robert Rowen is our guest. Thanks, Robert, for coming on. This is dynamite. And by the way, my Twitter feed has gone bananas with people who are really interested in this. You said that you're not exempting patients at your clinic. You're playing fair and you're operating within the law, and that's to be commended. Are you, while not giving out exemption passes or exemption forms, are you telling your patients, look, this is what I feel. I think there might be problems with these vaccines. Is that what you're doing?
Well, I do feel that there's problems with the vaccines. By the way, my Facebook page, go to my Facebook page, not Twitter, Dr. Robert J. Rowen, and there's a lot on there about vaccines going back in a couple of years, several years, a lot. Now, in terms of vaccine waivers, I don't think anyone would call into question issuing a waiver if a first-degree relative had autism, apparently from a vaccine. In other words, if a woman brought her son in and her firstborn son got a vaccine injury, no one that I know of, including the state, is going to question the wisdom of giving an exemption to that second child. Are you with me on that?
Absolutely, yeah.
No one will, because there is, no one will deny that there could be a genetic propensity for these things. On the other hand, if someone just walks into the office and says, I don't want to vaccinate my child, I can't do that, and I'm not going to do it because of the witch hunt.
Right. What happens then, though?
I talk with them about it. If there's free speech, I can talk with them about it, and then they're going to have to make a decision what they want to do. A lot of women in a lot of families in California now are homeschooling their children rather than getting them forcibly vaccinated in this scheme of Russian roulette.
Yeah, you are no use to anybody if you get into trouble with the board, with the certified board in California. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's brilliant. You can't be giving out the exemptions because of the witch hunt, but at the same time, you can say to patients, look, this is what I think. Now, the onus is on the parent then, what they do with that information. And it's brilliant. It's very interesting you talking about parents homeschooling. We have a real concern in the UK, Robert, that the state is looking to start removing children from homes where the parent has decided not to vaccinate. Is that something you're concerned about there in California?
I am very concerned about that ultimately, yes. I don't believe, this is my own opinion, I believe governments around the world, especially ours, have been hijacked by corporate interests and have forgot about the interests of the people. Our republic was founded on individual rights, not the Hitlerian method of we'll sacrifice your rights for the common good. And that's what that's what's happening right now. Your individual rights, the rights of you to raise your child and your family as you see fit, is being destroyed for the common good. And the common good is really the bottom line of corporate pharma. That's how I see it. That's why we have a system that's based on drugging symptoms instead of helping people get better by biological methods, giving them what their bodies need to heal, rather than drugging their symptoms into oblivion with chemicals, which cause more toxic effects, which requires more treatment, which is more profits for pharma.
So much to talk about. Dr. Robert Rowen is our guest. It's exactly, 16 and a half minutes, 17 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. extraordinary stuff. He's on Facebook. There's only one Dr. Rowen on Facebook. I will tweet a direct link to your Facebook page, Robert, and a link to your website as well, which is docrowen.com. Robert practices with his wife. As I said, he's a highly reputable MD, and he's asking some questions, some uncomfortable questions, I would imagine, for, again, those in power, at least those in power in California, when it comes to medicine. What about what's happening in Ireland? I'm an Irishman. There's no hiding it from my accent. I'm sure you've deduced that. I'm living and working in the United Kingdom now. You know, a couple of years ago, Robert, a number of women came to this programme. They formed a group called Regret, and their website is regret.ie. These are nice women. They're working women, working mothers. Some of them are stay-at-home mothers. They have teenage daughters, Robert, not in their tens or in their dozens, in their hundreds, convinced that their daughters have developed chronic fatigue symptoms or other horrible symptoms that have made their lives almost unlivable, and they are convinced there is a relationship between their symptoms, their illnesses, and the HPV vaccine Gardasil. The treatment of these girls and their parents by the Irish media has been disgraceful. By the Irish health authorities has been disgraceful. People have even accused the mothers, Robert, of being akin to child abusers. It's a disgrace. Have you followed this story, and do you have sympathy for these mothers and these girls who don't number 10 or 20 or 50? They number hundreds now, thousands around Europe actually. What do you think?
What do I think? I'm right on. I see this crap every day. I've seen children who have been injured by Gardasil, and it's a vaccine I would never, ever, ever give, because it's not a communicable disease in the example of measles, where you can cough on somebody and get it. Now, I know they're being treated horribly. I want to give you another hard example. In the country of Australia, doctors are losing their licenses because the authorities don't believe Lyme disease exists. So you can't treat Lyme disease, and I know doctors who are terrified of the authorities for this. Yet in my country, our CDC does recognize Lyme. It's warning people about being bitten by ticks, and there's 300,000 to 1 million new cases every year of this. So science, how can it be science if one country says, no, it doesn't exist, and another country says, yeah, we have an epidemic? That's not science, that's lunacy. And the Gardasil vaccine has injured a lot of young girls. I know this. And by the way, we have treated injured kids with ozone therapy, and it's remarkable what it can do. Not in everybody, but in a lot of cases. And I talk about ozone therapy on my Facebook page and also on my website.
I was going to ask you, Robert. Robert, hold your horses there, my friend. I was going to ask you because I've been reading all about ozone therapy. I watched your videos. I'm fascinated by it. I did notice that a couple of years ago, there was a very negative article in the Telegraph newspaper, which is a broadsheet national newspaper here in the UK. There was a very negative story about ozone therapy, and it's been called pseudoscience and all the rest of it. But I'm fascinated. I want to ask you about that in a minute, if that's okay. I am mindful of the fact that you have patience and you have things to do. At any time you want to tell me to piss off, excuse my language, I will piss off and leave you alone. But it's great to have you on, and there has been a huge reaction to this. I'm sure the listeners in Ireland who are affected by Gardasil will be moved by what you just said there, you being a general practitioner, an MD, and I do want to talk about ozone therapy in a minute. You talked about measles. Talk to me about herd immunity. I find this staggering, the idea that the unvaccinated could represent a threat to the vaccinated. I'm not the brightest spark in the world, Robert. I never claimed to be, but I can't get my head around the notion that an unvaccinated child could represent a threat to people who have been vaccinated. What's that all about?
Well, it doesn't make logical sense, and you're a layman, and I'm proud and impressed that you see it. Allegedly, if vaccination gives you immunity, then your child has the bulletproof vest. Your child does have no risk. So why the hell are you turning into my child, who's not vaccinated, into some ghoul, placing your child at risk, when if anyone's at risk, it's my child, according to your logic? It doesn't make sense. It's illogical. To me, in my language, I would call that an oxymoron.
Yeah.
It's craziness. Now, now I'm going to go on to something philosophical here. There are children who truly can't be vaccinated because of it. They have immune problems. They come into this world and they have problems. I'll admit to that, and I know that will be raised. And your child might be one of them. You can't get vaccinated against the measles, and if your child gets measles, it could be a calamity. Now, and I'm in agreement with that. Now, I'm trying to talk with wisdom, spirituality, science, and practicality all at once. Do you have the right? Now, let's say it's your child that has this immune problem. Do you have the right to compel me to vaccinate my child and put my child at risk to protect your child? You ask that question.
Yeah.
And then I want an answer from you. If you have the power to compel me to put my kid at risk to protect yours. Now, I'm going to tell you how I feel about this. Walking across the street is a risk. I could get hit by a car. Conceiving a child is a risk. Your child could have a genetic anomaly like Down syndrome or an immune problem. That's your problem. If you decide to conceive a child and there's a problem with that child, that's your problem. You took the risk. It's your responsibility. Where do you get the right to take my child or the woman down the street, her child, and inject aluminum to them to protect your child when you're the one who's responsible and you took the risk? Something's not right here. And if we're going to think about destroying the rights of the individual for the greater good, then we have an absolutely totalitarian society. And I personally believe that's where the world is marching to because of the corrupt corporate rulers of the world. That's what I believe.
Wow. You know, I was going to suggest, I was half thinking of not asking this next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway in light of what you said. Could it be even more sinister than some people think? Could there be an agenda to make people ill? You know, I mean, I know that sounds kind of James Bond villain type stuff, and you're a doctor, you're a man of science. You might think it's ridiculous, and by all means, shoot me down. But a part of me wonders, is there something going on here? Does somebody want to make children ill and create patients of the future? Go ahead.
I've written about this on my Facebook page, and if you go back, you'll see it. The pharmaceutical industry is the greatest, I don't know what the right word is, Ponzi pyramid system in the world. Is high blood pressure a deficiency of some synthetic petrochemical pharmaceutical? Or is high blood pressure a problem of lifestyle, eating fried foods, eating a lot of meat, eating a lot of trash, not getting vegetables? If hypertension, and there's studies out there, can be treated with potassium or magnesium or certain herbs or other things, that's telling us that that person has a deficiency of these essential nutrients. And to me, it makes more sense to get what that body is asking for and to correct it than some synthetic petrochemical pharmaceutical that will create toxicity or other effects that you need other profiting chemicals to treat. So now you have the greatest pyramid system the world has ever known. Take a chemical, get toxicity, now you need more chemicals, there's more injury, and so on, instead of addressing the cause.
Instead of dealing with the root cause. Before we talk about ozone, and anytime you want to bail, by the way, this is a professional network, a syndicated radio show. It really is. But I'm quite happy. If you've got to run, you can bail. But I wanted to put something to you. The Daily Mail is a national newspaper in the UK. It's a very popular paper. It does some good stuff sometimes. It puts out some good articles. Doesn't it? You know the Mail, the Mail online. Here's a story from yesterday. We are taking more pills than ever, and the trend shows no sign of abating. Last year, the National Health Service prescribed more than 1.1 billion items, which is double the number from 10 years ago. And that figure does not include medication dispensed in hospitals. As many as 20 prescriptions are now written per head of population each year, a rise of a third in just a decade, the Mail reported. And just before you come back in, Robert, for our listeners, there are just over 60 million people, 63 million people in the UK. And the statistics are showing that every person, all 63 point whatever million, are getting 20 prescriptions a year, double in 10 years. Robert, that's insane, isn't it?
Well, let me tell you, if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see a lot of people who are sick when they come to me. You'll see that. I have before, I have after videos. And there's a narcotic opiate crisis in this country. I think you know that as well.
Yeah.
Take a guess how many new prescriptions for opiates I've written in the last 20 years, except for a few cases of cancer. Take a guess.
Well, knowing what I know about you, having read about you and watched you, I'm guessing it's very, very, very low. You don't believe in it?
You won't even count it on the number of one hand.
Brilliant.
I don't have to write prescriptions for opiates because I go for the cause of pain. There is a crisis of drugs. Everything is based on drugs, and that's because it has to be approved. And you're not going to get anything approved by the so-called authorities unless you have, now the number is about $2 billion to get something approved so that you can formally prescribe it and it's accepted by everyone else and insurance. Now, who is going to come up with $2 billion to put vitamin C into a study or ozone into a study because it can't be patented? The system is inherently corrupt. It's inherent. It's built into the system. So more and more drugs are being prescribed and more people are getting sicker with these drugs. And that creates more and more money. Just follow the money trail.
Follow the money.
And you'll find out what's going wrong. In my practice, I do write a few prescriptions for drugs once in a while. It's not common, but there are some people with blood pressure that I just can't manage any other way. I have maybe 5 people like that. That's not very many. I don't write narcotics for pain. I don't have to, except a couple cases of cancer. And I have not written a prescription for an NSAID drug, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. I haven't written a prescription for that horrible class of drugs in about 25 years, maybe 30.
This is amazing, you know. It's so incredible to hear this from a GP. We say, of course, GP here in the UK, as you know. It's incredible because we are led to believe that one of the excuses doctors make in England, at least doctors who work for the NHS, one of the excuses they make is that patients come in all the time and patients expect a prescription. You know, when a patient goes to his or her doctor, they expect his or her doctor to give them a prescription.
Of course they do. And I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to give you a couple examples right out of your own country. I rarely have to write prescriptions for antibiotics. I use ozone or ultraviolet blood irradiation, and it's rare that I write prescriptions. And I've just published a case of an acute tick bite cellulitis that we cured with ozone therapy, no drugs. It was clearly a bacterial infection. I have a case of a woman with a septic prosthetic hip, which is unheard of to see resolve absent surgery to take it out or antibiotics. She got cured without surgery or intravenous antibiotics. She did get an oral antibiotic. This is the first in the world. And your own British medical journal or Lancet, I forget which one it was, refused to publish my article on curing Ebola. Yes, I went to Sierra Leone in 2014. We took ozone. We cured 5 cases of Ebola in days. In a couple days, those patients had no after effects. They got better immediately. I submitted that for publication to your journal, and they refused it, telling me, we don't think it would be of interest to our GPs.
Well, of course.
That's what they said. In the meantime, they're publishing crap on vaccines and experimental drugs for Ebola, but I took them a $5 cure, and they wouldn't publish it.
A $5 cure. And they turned you down, saying that it wasn't in the interest of the profession, it wasn't in the interest of their readers. That's disgraceful. Of course, they should have been all over that. They should have sent somebody to see you and to ask you to demonstrate it. Wow.
Richie, I haven't gotten anybody in the mainstream news to cover that, and it's published in the African Journal of Infectious Diseases, and the news media won't pick it up. I've sent it to the embassy in the DRC because there's a new Ebola epidemic. We've reached out. We've been willing, my partner and I have been willing to go back and help these people, but no one is interested.
They don't like you, Robert. This is Dr. Robert Rowen MD, by the way. They don't like you because you're one of them, or at least you should be. You see, you're an establishment. You're a qualified, certified doctor, and they don't like this. Just before we talk about ozone, that's the next thing, because I want to ask you what it is and give us the absolute rundown on what it is. A friend of mine, Jim, is listening to this with great interest, and Jim says, Richie, ask the doctor, do natural childhood illnesses prime our immune system into fighting much greater diseases in later life? It's a brilliant question by Jim. We need to get measles and all of this stuff when we're younger to give us a great immune system later on. Is that right?
I happen to believe it does. If you scroll way back on my Facebook page, I put up an article from the New England Journal of Medicine, top tier. It was published in the early 2000s, where the author questioned our wisdom in giving vaccines, saying that the lack of these childhood illnesses seemed to impair immunity later in life. And that's why I'm calling, look, I'm trying to be honest and honorable here and not some crazy wacko. I'm saying that we need a study of 5 to 10,000 kids who do get vaccinated and 5 to 10,000 who don't. Let these kids get their diseases, and then let's take a look at their health 10 years later, 20 years later, like we did with the Framingham study on cholesterol in Massachusetts. They're studying families out generations now. We need to be doing this before we forcibly inject people with things, and we're not doing it. And yes, I do believe that getting these illnesses properly primes the immune system for a lifetime of balanced immunity, because you have plastic immunity with vaccines. You don't have real immunity. If you did, the immunity wouldn't wear off. The immunity from vaccines wears off in 10 to 15, maybe 20 years because it's a weak immunity. It involves what's called the humoral immune system, which is antibodies. And real immunity comes from the cellular immune system, which is permanent. Now, it wouldn't bother me a bit to walk into a cloud of measles. If there was a measles room down the street, I'd walk in there and I wouldn't have any issue because I had measles when I was a kid. But somebody who got vaccinated 25 years ago from measles could have an issue because his vaccine immunity might have waned.
I didn't know that. This is news to me. I did not know that. Somebody who took the vaccination, it's waned. Possibly it might not, but it might have. And then they might be susceptible to it now. It's tyrannical, this notion of telling people that they must be vaccinated or they can't work this job, or your child must be vaccinated or they can't go to this school. These are dreadful things. In the time we have left with Dr. Robert Rowen MD, thanks for your time, Doc. It's an absolute honour to have you on the programme today. It really is. DocRowen.com. I'd like to ask you about ozone. What is it, Doctor? What is ozone, and how has it benefited your patients? You talked about the Ebola cures, which is amazing. How has it worked for you? When did you come across it, and how do you use it on a daily basis?
I stumbled across it in 1986. I thought it was crazy at first because we were supposed to believe in antioxidants, and this is an oxidant. But I read the materials, and I just couldn't believe what I was reading. So I said I had to try this. I was living in Alaska at the time. I lived there 22 years. And with my very first patient who got better from something weird, which today we probably would call Lyme disease, I said, geez, this is amazing. Well, ozone, people come to us from around the world for this, literally around the world. I've had people from Australia, from the UK. I've had people sicker than crap with Lyme disease who couldn't function, literally couldn't function. It's on my YouTube channel. And after several treatments of this, and sometimes their brain fog clears on the first treatment, they're much better. Ozone, and I do joints like knees, our results with knees are about 85%. We're able to save them from surgery. Their knees get better from degenerative arthritis. It treats just about everything. Now, look, I'm not saying that it's a universal cure. It's the closest thing to a universal panacea we have. And the reason is that all healing is dependent upon oxygen. I'm sure you'd accept that, right?
I would. Now, of course, I'm a layman, as you pointed out quite rightly earlier on, and I've heard that from other doctors, learned men and women such as yourself. So yes, I would accept that, but I'm a layman. Go ahead.
Oxygen, oxygen, oxygen. Everything is dependent on oxygen. When you injure yourself, you disrupt the circulation, and it's slow to heal because of less oxygen because of the injury. If you have an infection, your immune cells need 50 to 100 times more oxygen to fight the invader. This is all published stuff. This is not pie in the sky stuff. Ozone is oxygen. It's O3. It's very reactive oxygen. And it has several effects, and I'll tell you some of those effects and why I decided I would risk my life and go treat Ebola. The reason is that, one, when you give ozone therapy to somebody, it increases a compound in the red cells called 2,3-DGP, which enables them to easier release their oxygen in the tissues, so you get better oxygen delivery. Two, it improves the red cells' flexibility so that they can squeeze through your tiny capillaries better. Three, it enhances mitochondrial consumption of oxygen. And I say that by a study that I can infer that that's happening because you get a rise in oxygen delivery and you get a reduction in oxygen return to the heart. And that difference means more oxygen consumption in the tissues, which means more energy. The next effect of ozone is it has direct killing ability to pathogens. And the final effect that I use for Ebola is ozone modulates the immune system. So if your immune system is out of balance, it brings it back into balance. And with Ebola, your immune system is way out of balance because the virus doesn't kill you. Your immune system, it's called a cytokine storm, does kill you, and ozone therapy modulates that. So all these are wonderful effects for people who are diseased because all of these wonderful effects will help almost anything out there. Now, your degree of improvement will depend upon you. I have seen people with acute infections get better like that day or the next day or within a couple days of ozone. I will combine ozone with standard antibiotic therapy if they need it. I'm not against that. I use ozone for circulation. I use it for toxicity. I've seen a couple people with cancer do extraordinarily well with it, but that's hit and miss. And I'm not telling you it is a cure for cancer, but it is published that ozone makes sense for cancer because if you get more oxygen to the cancer behaves less aggressively. And ozone helps you get more oxygen to it. So ozone is probably one of the best treatments that there is.
And it's inexpensive. You said earlier on, you talked about a $5 cure for Ebola. Where did this happen in Africa? Was it in the Central African Republic? Where was it exactly, Robert?
Sierra Leone, a former British colony.
Sierra Leone.
My partner and I were invited by the president of the country, and we actually met him to come and train their people with ozone. And in the midst of training them, in the middle, a call came in from the Minister of Health telling the treatment center, if you continue with the ozone process, you'll lose your job. So I felt like I was kicked in the gonads. I'm being polite here with my words.
Yeah, you don't have to be polite. We're past the watershed. Well, there is no watershed on this program.
I was kicked in the balls, literally, and I lost it. I am usually even-tempered, and I lost it. And I screamed to those people. I said, to me, it was an illegal order. It's basically the equivalent of genocide. I said, doctors in this room are going to die. And yes, I was right.
You were right.
One of the doctors I had trained to do ozone eventually got Ebola. And because they canned the project, he was denied ozone and he was hauled away in an ambulance and eventually died. Now, another doctor that I trained decided not to tell the government that he had Ebola, that he had symptoms, because he knew that if he did, he'd be thrown in the tank, and then he had a 60% chance of dying. So he went to our people, got ozone, and recovered in 48 hours. How about that?
It's very frustrating. Do you know, Robert, it's very frustrating to hear this, particularly because when I speak to people, I don't speak to people like you very often. Like I said earlier on, I don't get so many GPs or MDs on. We do get some, but not very many. It's often alternative health practitioners, people whom I vetted very hard before inviting on. And it's when we bring people on to talk about alternative remedies or alternative ways to treat things, some of our skeptical listeners, they say, oh, this is pseudoscience, they say, and it's snake oil. They say that some of these people they're basically trying to empty your pockets, they're greedy, they're selling you snake oil. But this is not the case.
Are you telling me the farmer's not trying to empty your pockets?
Well, that's right, yeah. How ironic, of course. And I make that point all the time. I say, look, how ironic. But ozone it's very, very affordable, this, isn't it? You mentioned earlier on a few bucks for people to get access to it. Talk to me about the affordability of it, the practicality of people treating themselves with this.
All right, let me. I'll get to that after I tell you what happened with Ebola.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
About a year ago, a doctor in South Africa who had inside connections told me what happened in Sierra Leone. He told me that he found out that the World Health Organization went to the government of Sierra Leone as the pimp for pharma and told the government, if you don't stop the ozone project, the pharma will not only pull out of your country, Sierra Leone, but out of all of Africa.
Shut down, basically.
Yes. So, in my opinion, lives were traded for profit. That's my opinion. Merck Company murdered over 100, and I use that word carefully. Merck knew Vioxx was killing people, and it kept it on the market for profit until it was finally pulled after over 110,000 American deaths. Now, to me, that's murder because they knew it was killing people and they were making money on it. So let's get back to ozone. Ozone can be dirt cheap and it can be rather expensive. It depends how you give it. In third world countries, it's generally given by direct intravenous gas injection, where you actually inject the gas into the vein. Now, most of the seasoned ozone doctors don't like to do this because there are a few problems with it. It can be hard on veins. It can cause coughing and some chest discomfort. So most seasoned doctors in the Western world don't like this, and they talk down about it, and that's fine. I accept that. I don't typically do that method, but for Sierra Leone, where you don't have sophisticated machines and equipment, and there's a risk of major contamination with Ebola, a 27 gauge butterfly needle in a syringe is the only thing you need to treat them. And you can use the same syringe over and over again, so it costs less than $5 to treat somebody with this method. Now, if you're using the better methods called major autohemotherapy or hyperbaric ozone, now you need sophisticated, more expensive machines, and you need equipment that requires medical disposal. So the price goes up. And in the third world, I would say, like in India, where they're doing this, you could get the direct intravenous gas for as little as a couple dollars. And in other countries, like Western countries, you could get the better form of ozone for anywhere between maybe $100 and you could get the best form, which is a massive amount of ozone. They can cost several $100.
Compared to some of the figures that they throw around about oncology and cancer treatments here in the UK, it still sounds relatively cheap by comparison. And I suppose if GP surgeries were to have the machines, they could offset the price of the machines across treating many patients and bring the price right down, right? It makes sense to me.
If you introduced ozone therapy into the British system, you would have a revolution in real health. Instead of it being disease maintenance, we don't have a health system. We have a disease maintenance system. You would stop that and you would see people being returned to health where they wouldn't need all these 20 drugs per person that you're talking about. It's not just ozone. I have three mantras. My mantras for getting somebody well are to deal with the three biggies: improper nutrition, toxins, and stress. To me, vaccines are a major toxin in a lot of people. All people are nutritionally deficient because they're eating a crummy diet.
Yeah.
My mantra is, if God didn't make it, don't eat it. That's my mantra, and that's how I live my life. So we're dealing with improper nutrition, toxins, and stress, and pharma's answer to it is synthetic, petrochemical, patented, pharmaceutical, profit-making drugs. And that's all we get because they own the system.
And you can go to Sierra Leone and you can document the efficiency of ozone. And I've read quite a bit about it. Like I said, in the interest of balance, there was an article in the Telegraph here a couple of years ago claiming to debunk it and saying it was pseudoscience and saying it was dangerous. People can read that if they want. That's democracy. Listen to Dr. Robert Rowen speaking about ozone here, but go and read the Telegraph article as well. But I'm fascinated by this. I'm going to...
Let me tell you this.
Go ahead.
True story. I emailed the Telegraph. I emailed the Mirror. I let them know about this. One of your nurses, a UK nurse, came back from West Africa with Ebola, and they were fearful that she would die. I reached out to the doctor in the hospital about the article. I was willing to even fly over there and treat her.
Nothing.
I think her name was McCafferty or something like that.
You're right.
She didn't survive, thank God, but I'm just letting you know that I was willing to do this.
How frustrating is that? You talked about $2 billion spent on getting a drug to market. You and others, not just you, but other learned men and women, swear by the efficiency and the safety, the non-side effect, which is obviously hugely important, ozone, and yet you can't get a look in. You sent documentation to The Lancet. You invited them to take a look at it. That's, of course, a very famous medical journal, and they basically told you to get stuffed, go away. How frustrating is that, Robert?
I have to admit, it is frustrating. It's hard. It's hard when you have something that could help so many people, that is without risk, without toxicity, and is dirt cheap, and it could help so many people, and the system just won't look at it. JAMA describes that, and it's in one of my latest articles. You could go to PubMed and type in the word Rowen and ozone, and you'll see several articles that I've recently published in mainstream journals. Well, JAMA published something years ago by an author named Goodwin, who called it the tomato effect. So the tomato effect is describing a therapy that is working, that works, that could be phenomenal, but no one gives it the time of day because no one believes that it could work. That's the tomato effect, and ozone suffers from it.
I've got to mention one last thing before we part company today, and it's been a tonic. No, it has been a tonic having you on, speaking to you today. But David Noakes has been on this program several times, and I think David is very honest. He's been sent to prison for 6 months. He was manufacturing and selling GC math, and maybe he wasn't doing it properly, maybe he didn't box clever, but I know that he absolutely believed, regardless of whether he was right or not, he believed in GC math and that it was helpful and that it was useful in treating various things. And he would say that he would echo what you said earlier on, that some very powerful interests were influential in getting him shut down. Now, the judge did say in the court case that after a time period, money did become the motivation for David. Like I did put those questions to him when I interviewed him myself before he went to prison. But I'm inclined to believe that there are a lot of things that have been developed, natural things, by people like yourself, Robert, and others, that are being kept from people. There's no doubt in my mind that the influence of Big Pharma in this country, in Ireland and in Europe, through the European Union, through the World Health Organization, which is a revolving door for Big Pharma, I have no doubt that they are working night and day to prevent people from looking closely at ozone and other things. I have no doubt about that. Do you know, it's been brilliant having you on the programme today, Robert. I'm going to give you the final word. Before I do, though, I'm going to recommend that people find you on Facebook. I will put a link to it on my Twitter, and I will put a link to it on my website where they can find you on Facebook. But you can also find out more about Robert on YouTube. Just look for Dr. Robert Rowen on YouTube. You'll find him. And the website is docrowen.com. Thanks for coming on and speaking to us today, giving us your time Robert, I really enjoyed listening to you. I'll give you the final word. Before you have that final word, I want to wish you and yours a Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year. Final word to you, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. My advice for diet, if God didn't make it, don't eat it. And please go to somebody who can help you look for causes for your problem. No one was born with a deficiency of a synthetic petrochemical pharmaceutical drug. When you find someone who is, I'll write the prescription for it. I've never seen it.
Robert, brilliant stuff. Thanks a lot. Please come back again in the new year. It'd be great to have you back. Maybe do a question and answer segment with our audience if you had the time to spare. Thanks again. Look after yourself and Merry Christmas. Bye for now.
Thank you.